Once I get the camera set up nicely, I can begin. I've had some questions about switching from a Pro 15 to a 2.5, especially with the Nitro Rustler. This is a really good motor for the Nitro Rustler. You get a little more power, better top speed, more torque. So this is basically how to rebuild a motor in about 10 minutes. First thing you want to go after is, right now there's no clutch belt or clutch on this. Clutch belt is held on with an E-clip. You just pop it off with a flathead screwdriver, and make sure you don't lose your shims, because your shims locate the clutch bell on this shaft just right. And then you take off the clutch, which is basically a circle. It just pulls off these two pins. And then you are going to need a 8mm deep socket. And make sure you do this on a clean workbench, because you don't want anything to get inside. Once you get the flywheel nut off, you can sort of tap the flywheel and it just comes right off. Then you have the collet that holds the flywheel in place. This part right here. And then you're going to go after the back plate. 2.5mm. 4 screws. And once you rebuild motors so many times, it's not hard at all. And yes, there's no one-way bearing on the rear of this or any type of starter, so that gave me a little bit of leeway, but I'm talking about rebuilding the motor itself, nothing else. Just take out those 4 screws. Remember what screws go where. Okay, that's off. Now you're going to go after the head. So you can pull this off. That's the back plate with the starter shaft. And now you're going to have to pull this black piece off. There's 5 bolts. When you're tightening, you generally want to go in a star pattern, but loosening, I really don't go for that. So, as for the head, just get all the bolts loose. There's the head. You got your head shims right there. Don't lose that. If you lose your head shim, you're going to have to get new ones. At this point, you're going to have to get the sleeve out. One thing that I found that works very well for me is zip ties. Sometimes they'll cut it in half. Sometimes it'll actually work for you. So at this point, you're going to have to put the zip tie in through the exhaust port. Put your... I don't know why I took the flywheel off first, but you can put this back on real quick. It's not hard. I always forget with some motors. Some motors, they're pressed, the sleeve is pressed in, so, okay. Sleeve is up. As far as it's going to go using a zip tie. So now you can get... You're going to need 2 small flathead screwdrivers. I use jeweler screwdrivers. There's a flathead. And there's a flathead. So now you can just take these 2 flatheads, one on each side. You don't want to squeeze it in any way, because you'll warp. That's out. At this point, you can pull your piston. Just get it off the crank. Put the crankshaft to the top of its rotation. The piston will come off the crankshaft. There's your piston. And then go back after the flywheel. Flywheel nut, flywheel itself, collet, crankshaft, and carb is just held in with one little bolt. Easy to do. Now putting it back together, flywheel back in, no, crankshaft back in, excuse me. When you're putting your piston back in, you want to make sure that this cutout is facing towards the front, because that cutout is clearance for the crankshaft, the weighted end of the crankshaft. So now you have to line them up, get it over the crankshaft, push it in place, and now we can go ahead and put the back plate back on. Make sure that these little cutouts right here are facing up. Don't force this on. If you force it on, you could break the crankshaft. You want to make sure that the starter shaft seats onto the crank pin. And now you can take the 4 bolts that held it in place. With this, you only need a 2.5 millimeter to get like a pull start or any type of starter assembly off. You're going to need 2.5. That's what size those bolts are. Still make sure that's on there before I go tightening things down, because you definitely don't want to bend your crankshaft. Put 2 bolts across from each other. Snug them down a little. Make sure that the back plate seats. Oh, one thing I didn't go over is the bearings. You're going to want to check the bearings. With the front bearing, you can use a decent sized socket that fits through the main bearing and just sort of knock it out. And with the rear bearing, you heat your oven up to 350 degrees and let the motor sit in there for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then smack it like this, and the main / rear bearing will come out. For older motors, it'll take a little bit of time. But once you do so many of these motors so many times, they're all made the same pretty much. You have the back plate, 4 bolts. You have the head, 4 to 5 bolts. You have the flywheel, clutch. Okay, now we can drop the sleeve. You're going to want to put it upside down. You have a locating pin right here. And you have a cutout in the sleeve itself, so that'll locate the sleeve. I hold it upside down and get the crank at the top of its. And then you can get the sleeve back in. Oh, you pain. Things never go like you would hope in videos. You want to get it as pretty much as close as you can to straight up and down. Okay, piston's back inside the sleeve. Sleeve isn't located 100%, so spin it a little until it hits that pin. Sleeve is back in. So now we can remount the head. Make sure you get the cutout in the fins just right, because that allows you to get down to the mounting bolts. Get your 5 pins, do them diagonally, star, so you do this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. And you don't snug them up at first, you just get them a little tight so it'll stay in place. Because you want to torque it slowly like an engine head. You don't want to warp anything. If you go too fast, you could warp things. If I didn't run into a few little problems, I wouldn't. Okay, so all that's tight. Now tighten down nicely. You don't have to go nuts. Just get them snug. As the engine heat cycles, they'll tighten up even more. Heat cycling is getting hot, getting cold, getting hot, getting cold. Come on, get on the head. Now your flywheel, install collet back on the crankshaft, flywheel nut. Get your 8mm back on there. You can hold your flywheel with a pair of pliers, but usually I just hold it like that and crank down on it because you want that seated on that collet good. And there you have it. Traxxas 2.5. Same with the 3.3. The Pro 15 is a little simpler because you only have 4 bolts up top. But with this, had nothing. I don't have a header on it. I don't have any type of starter, and I didn't have the clutch or the clutch bell. But like I said, this is just rebuilding the engine. And as you can hear and even see right here, as I get to the top of the stroke, and you can even hear that glow plug isn't tight. Now it is. But that's how you can rebuild a 2.5 decently quick. Now at this point, you put your clutch on, clutch bell, the E-clip, E-ring, whatever you want to call it, to hold everything in place. Put your starter on, put your header on, install it in the car, hook up your exhaust, hook up, put your carb in, hook up your fuel lines, and you're ready to go. Get a prime it first. Put your glow igniter on the top, give it a couple pulls, or if you're using a easy start, no longer than 5 seconds. If it doesn't start after 5 seconds, there's something wrong. You don't want to continue turning it over after 5 seconds and it's not starting. So that's it. And if you're getting a 2.5 and you're moving stuff over from a Pro 15, it's very easy. Basically has the same flywheel. The carburetor is different. Pretty much this entire engine is different. The 2.5 and the 3.3 share the same engine design. The 3.3 just has a larger bore and I think a slightly larger stroke. So it's 3.3 cc's and not 2.5. But the reason this is better than the Pro 15 is the porting done inside. Also, you have the intake coming in and then the exhaust going out this way. So the incoming gases and everything isn't having to change directions to leave the engine, so they're more efficient. That's when you come across big blocks, stuff like that. Same way with this engine. This is a Traxxas 3.3 that I've broken when I was doing my run for 100 mile an hour with nitro. I ended up using a RV Mods 3.7. It's just a 3.3 bored and stroked, I believe. I don't know exactly. Rick has some proprietary alien technology there. But that's it. That's all you have to do.